So the next model we're going to be learning is similar to the budget constraint, but we zoom out and we look at an economy as a whole, right? So we zoom out and look at either the forest for the trees, or we look at the full pond ecosystem. And again, we're not going to have prices on the y-axis and quantity of goods on the x-axis. This is going to be, I think, the last time that we don't have that. And we're going to have two goods or two types of goods on each axis, right? So we can talk about healthcare spending, and we can talk about education spending. And so this shows the different combination of two products that an economy can produce given the resources it has available. So this is given the resources it has available, it can produce this much healthcare and no education, or it can produce this much education and no healthcare. And now again, so one of the first things that we see as a key difference between this and the production and the budget constraint is the fact that I have no numbers here, right? In the budget constraint, I was able to be like, oh, 10 divided by 2, that's 5 burgers. That's the most that Alfonso can buy is 5 burgers. I have no idea how many trillions of dollars the United States can spend on healthcare if they decided to spend no money on education. We don't have a data point for that. There's never been an instance where the United States has never spent any money on education. So yeah, we could like hypothetically come up with it, but at the end of the day, this is a theoretical generic example. We don't need numbers here, so there's no numbers. The second main point that we have is that instead of there being a straight line like there was before, not going to happen. Now we have a bowed out curve that looks something like this. So why does it look like a bubble instead of a line? Well, the reason why it looks like a bubble instead of a line is because there is a sweet spot of production around here in the middle. So this sweet spot of production around here in the middle is where the resources that are best used for education are going to education, and the resources that are best used for healthcare are going to healthcare. Okay? Now, if we start to push the economy towards only healthcare, we're going to essentially be trying to retrain teachers to be nurses. We're going to try to make schools into urgent care clinics. We're going to try, there's going to be a lot of us trying to put square pegs into round holes, right? We're going to use the least efficient resources. So in this region, the most efficient resources are being used. But as soon as we start to push towards any one of these extremes, this is where we're forcing education resources to be healthcare resources. And similar situation over here, right? That we're trying to convert healthcare to education. We're trying to make nurses into teachers, doctors into superintendents. Like, I don't know, right? It's kind of a tortured example, so I'll stop. But the point is that when we start to focus more and more and more on one type of good or one type of industry, the returns that we get from an additional laborer in that industry decrease, right? That diminishing marginal utility. There's a similar situation here where, when you try to use less productive, less suitable resources, then your trade-off decreases, right? So that this same kind of, so let's say right here, it's like a one-for-one kind of situation, right? And so right here, if I want to get 0.25 extra healthcare, I have to sacrifice a full unit of education, right? If I want to get $250 billion of healthcare spending, I have to sacrifice $1 trillion, 4 times as much of education. And then there's a similar situation here, right? Where, you know, for right here, in order to get $500 billion of education, I've got to give up, you know, $1.5 trillion of healthcare spending. So when we get to these extremes, the opportunity cost increases. So as we get to each edge, the opportunity cost of whatever's on that axis increases. All right, last 2 things, and then we'll do a quick Kahoot, and we'll be done. No class on Friday this week. Pretty cool. So the last 2 things are the situation of productive efficiency compared to allocative efficiency. So on this graph, let's just take a quick... No, too much. All right, so on this graph, we have all these points along the curve. Any point on the curve is what we call productively efficient. It means we're using all the resources. We're not leaving any on the table. We're not leaving any amount of healthcare spending on the table. We're not leaving any amount of education spending on the table. If we are in a spot that is inside of the curve, any one of these spots, these are all inefficient. If we have points outside of the curve, these are unobtainable. And then there's some sort of range of points on the curve that we don't exactly know, but again, it's somewhere in this region in the middle. So this is the region where every point on here and again, it depends. It's all depending on what's going on with the Overton window and kind of what society determines they give a crap about, right? But this is talking about allocative efficiency. So depending on where we are, right now, we're actually probably more over here because there's actually not a lot of supportive education spending publicly, right? There's, you know, in the state of Nebraska, there's been a pullback, and the United States writ large, there's been a pullback of funding for higher education, right? So we're probably over here. Now, we know that we don't want a scenario where there's only healthcare spending and no education. We know that we don't want a scenario where there's only education spending and no healthcare, right? Which is why I'm saying that there's some range that is what's called allocatively efficient. And this is essentially the mix that society most desires. So productively efficient is anywhere on the curve. Allocatively efficient is subjective, and it's usually anywhere that's not on those extremes of the curve. All right, we'll do our Kahoot real quick.